Welcome to the Post-Capitalist Workplace podcast, hosted by Anuradha, a leading accessibility strategist supporting organizations of today to become organizations of the future. In Season 1, we'll explore what accessibility truly means at its core, as well as the crucial role it plays in decolonizing organizations. While Season 2 spotlights real-world examples of impactful accessibility initiatives and why they're key to addressing some of society's biggest challenges. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. It's Anuradha, and I'm excited for episode 5, where we're going to be looking at what does the post-capitalist workplace look like? This is an envisioning activity. However, the good news is there are some organizations already doing the work. So we have glimpses of what that can look like in practice. And we've already laid some of the foundations for this through our previous episodes where we talked about what is accessibility and how bad is it really to be working in organizations right now? What is the real state of barriers that people face in the workplace? And that was episodes 3 and 4. And this episode will kind of lay the foundation for what can you do. So we're going to be giving more real world examples in future episodes with some case studies, as well as talking about the audit process we use so we can help organizations really improve things going forward. We also are going to have an episode on our audit process, which helps organizations create the foundations for sustainable change that delivers delight, joy, and liberatory feeling and work justice in organizations so their staff and their customers and so on benefit from this accessibility. And in some cases where I work with micro organizations, a lot of times founders and the initial people working on these teams are not making things accessible for themselves in the first instance. So that can be very draining to get an operation off the ground, to be quite honest. All right, so that's all what's going to happen going forward. But to bring us back to the topic at hand, if you remember in episodes 3 and 4, I painted a picture of what it's like to work in some of these organizations, the barriers even to get in the door, to get a job and to show up at said workplace, not to mention the myriad of barriers in all sorts of ways, especially if we look at it from an intersectional lens, because we know people don't just have one marginalized identity. People tend to have some privilege and some marginalized identities. And so they don't necessarily get the support they need to show up in the workplace as fully and feel supported. As I shared in the last episode, instead of rushing in to go and fix this and improve everything overnight, I recommend us to sit back and reflect through our own feelings and not get defensive, and then take action that is sustainable towards a different future. This is not, let me just go in and fix it with some Band-Aids. We want to do considered work here. And this episode's going to share how we can start to create some momentum by imagining, because right now, whether or not we realize it in the current paradigm, we are by and large, as I discussed in episode 1 and 2, we're by and large indoctrinated into this capitalistic, cis, hetero, patriarchal, colonialistic system that has very specific ways we view the world and the workplace. So we have to undo that. And part of undoing that is doing that reflective work and doing the healing that is necessary as an organization. Some of that work is reimagining. Like, oh, what we were given maybe isn't working. Let's imagine it, not just by rearranging deck chairs, so to speak, on a sinking ship. That's not going to help us, but to drastically reimagine what this place can look like. So that's what we're going to be doing in this episode. As always, I have tons of notes, so I'm hoping to cover it all. Let's see if I can do it in one episode, but we'll see. So a few caveats before going into this episode. One, you need to use your imagination. This is imagination heavy work. And it might mean looking at clues from what other people are doing and then pivoting it towards what we're doing in our organization, making it make sense for our location, for our industry or sector, for our team, for who's in the room or who we want to be in the room right now. It is not just cutting and pasting someone else's strategy and doing that ourselves, because it might not make sense for us. We might not have the same resources. We might not have the same goals. Our mission might be very different. Our core values might be different. The way we work might be different. We might have more neurodivergent people than another team. So we need to take that into consideration. So this is a place where you need to really bring that active imagination. Second of all, I don't share the examples here as a prescription. I don't generally do prescriptive work, and only I do that in small doses as a consultant. Most of the work and the approach I advocate for is a generative process, meaning we co-create it. We co-create it with who's in the room. When I work with an organization, I help facilitate discussion so we can co-create something that will stand the test of time and has input from all the stakeholders. And that's a really important way to create something that's lasting and that is inclusive. And the last piece of this that I want you to carry as you're listening to this is the real work is not the imagining. That's the fun part. The real work is rolling up our sleeves and doing it, because it's not always easy. It tends to be messy. We tend not to know when to do it or how to do it. We might make mistakes. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the future episodes. But for right now, understand this is a precursor to deciding to roll up our sleeves and do the real work. All right. So that being said, what does a post-capitalist workplace look like? In my opinion, we really need to be able to slow down to have that conversation and reimagine. I call this, in my own personal vocabulary, the creative container, that we need a container to dream. And oftentimes with organizations, that can be reimagining this, but we need a space that is kind of a whiteboard or as an artist, the blank white page, the canvas, if you will, for us to play. Or as a garden, it might be a part of our garden that we are leaving fallow. So we can imagine not only what's going to show up in that space, but what we might want there, thinking about what that would look like, creating the container around us for the resources and the time and the budget and all those practical things of making the thing a reality. And sometimes that means doing this away from prying eyes. It might be doing this privately within your own organizations before you announce it to the whole world. And that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Because sometimes when we start to dream, other people might come in with their agendas or pressure or whatever. And that's why this space is so sacred. When I'm coming back to this question of what does a post-capitalist workplace look like, I want to think about questions like fair wage. We talked about the pay gaps in the previous episode, and that a lot of times organizations or corporations in particular externalize costs. You know, the environment, we're seeing that right now in the UK with raw sewage being dumped into our waterways, right? So they're externalizing the cost of actually having to clean up things. And of course, the people at the top continuing to make more money while the average worker unable to do that. So they're not seeing any benefit from this cost savings, and we're externalizing these costs. So things like fair wage, what I would call a living wage. And there's a lot of economic estimates of how we can figure that out. But the thing is, we need to be realistic for that. Right now in the UK, we have a London wage and then we have an outside of London wage. And to be quite honest, I think cost of living and the greed crisis that we're in really means a lot of prices have gone up significantly and the pay hasn't necessarily kept pace. So we need to be reevaluating that. I think there's also something to be said about the benefits piece, that at least in a US context, healthcare is often tied to employment. So if one loses their job, they probably will also lose their benefits or access to health care. And it's very uneven in terms of who gets what kind of health care. I remember when I was a grad student not having health insurance and that being a little bit of a scary time in terms of, I hope nothing goes wrong. So this kind of thing, making sure our benefits also are supporting people. And then things like a UBI. And a UBI is a universal basic income. There's been hundreds of studies showing time and time again when people are paid an amount that is consistent, that through the generally government schemes or self-funded schemes, that they, and here I'm using scheme in the UK context, not in the US context, but when people are paid a universal basic income, time and time again, they end up finding work, they give back in their community, they create community projects, they start saving, they start contributing to society, and so on. So people have it's the capitalist indoctrination that tells us, oh, if people have free money, they won't do anything. That is actually the opposite has been shown time and time again. And what they've done in Wales recently is they have given UBI support to people who've exited the foster system. So that means people who would generally be left on their own as they matured out of the system to be supported. And I think that kind of remarkable thing would go a long way. So that might not always be tied to employment, but these kinds of things are super important to make things more equitable and allow people to do their job in a way that then they're not worried about the day-to-day things. The other thing is childcare. We spent some time talking about care responsibilities. When I went to university, I went to New Mexico Tech, also known as New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology in Socorro, New Mexico. And one of the things that I really loved about that place was they had childcare for non-traditional students who had children or staff and faculty. So that was an amazing thing. That kind of thing goes a long way to supporting workers. And they also had married student housing. So when we often start thinking about these hallmarks of a post-capitalist workplace, we're thinking about the needs of our clients and we're not guessing. We've actually included them in the conversation. What would be helpful? And that married student housing was for students who were doing their master's or PhD work where they were probably coming in from another country. Unfortunately, one of the popular degrees at the school that I went to was petroleum. It was founded during the gold rush, if that gives you any indication, and the mining in the title. So that's one of the downsides of the university I went to. But having people from abroad and then having their housing costs brought to a normal level, so they didn't pay like full rent, they had a subsidized housing, that made it easier for people who were coming internationally to do work at the university and study, had the support they needed. So those kinds of things are really important to be thinking about. And I would say in the same vein, childcare, housing, retirement plans, transportation, education, these things are all really important to be advocating for community stuff. So whether your organization controls all that or not, chances are they don't, but to strongly be advocating for those things in the community because those impact your workers in many positive ways. So continuing to advocate for these things is a piece of this work. I also think people really loved flexible and remote work, if possible. Not only did it save organizations money, people by and large really liked it. And as I've discussed in previous episodes, that's not 100% across the board, but having some flexibility for care duties, for weird schedules, for having the trust to do things and get them done in your own way, in your own time. Those things all, I think, go a long way. And if you can also have support for people who want to be in the office full time and activities and community building in different ways, I think there is a happy medium to be reached. What we're seeing in mass right now is people being forced back into the offices. And so that doesn't feel very post-capitalist. And in fact, in one instance, they were forcing people back into the office and they didn't even have desks for everybody. And I believe this was Amazon recently. So we want to be thinking about, hey, does this policy even actually work or does it not? Because that erodes trust, in my opinion. And all of the things I'm going to say, one of the trends that really, the thread that ties all these things together is building trust. In episode 2, I talked a little bit about our manifesto and some of our guiding pillars. I won't repeat them all here, but I will at least name a couple in that accessibility is a key part of dismantling systems of oppression. What you're doing every day matters. We believe that everyone deserves delightful experiences, and that's for work and that's for people when they are shopping with you or working with you. They deserve that experience. We also talked about nuance, creating psychological safety, centering the needs of historically marginalized people, and co-creation are really important ones, as well as lived experience experts. So with those pillars in mind, I'm going to share some of the things that I think that I've been seeing that are working in terms of what that can look like. It might seem like a utopia to create a post-capitalist workplace built on these tenets. Like, where are we today and where is that discussion happening? However, there are some examples, some signposts, and some seeds of ideas that are happening, some praxis, meaning actually organizations developing practices that really support moving in the right direction. In the next episode, I'm going to share some more detailed case studies, but I wanted to share some client examples. First of all, there is a state government that I've spent some time working with in the US, and they have been working towards not only equitably funding and paying lived experience experts, but developing resources for these lived experience experts to shape policy across the state. This is really important because in this group, they are family leaders. So they are working with young children. They have children. They are grandparents or caregivers in some capacity. And their expertise has been shaping policy and programs so it supports families and young children in a really positive way. And this is going on statewide. And by equitably paying these lived experience experts, not only does that mean the people who will be impacted by such rules actually be in the decision-making rooms, but then they're equitably compensated. That's one thing that capitalism helps us do. And I say this tongue in cheek, that sentence is it externalizes costs. So I mentioned about externalizing environmental costs. One thing we do when we hire freelance people or people like lived experience experts and not paying them on salary is we externalize all their costs. So things like their benefits in insurance and retirement, we're not contributing to that. We're not paying them a living wage. And in this case, when they have young children or other care responsibilities, we're not compensating them for that time. And that frees them up so they can do this work. So paying them at an equitable rate is super important. And that project has been done in 3 phases. And I actually got to meet some of the people on the 3rd phase who benefited from the initial phases of getting the equitable pay system in place. That was a huge win. And that's the kind of work that it is very much community oriented. That's important. Is the program perfect? No, but there is movement. And those kinds of things will only improve because they have kept that as their primary focus. Another organization that I've worked with is UK-based, and this is a city here in the UK that is really committed to bringing lived experience experts in to city governance by having them feedback in 7 key areas, including race and religion and so on. So those individuals can feed back and share their thoughts on policy. And it brings these groups in a way that they're supported so they can do good work in the community and engage people. Community engagement is so huge. it takes a big chunk of money that would generally be invested in corporations to do this work and for people to be basically uninvolved, yet they're the ones who would bear the brunt of whatever decisions are made. It brings them into the decision-making process. Now, is this perfect? No. But this particular group has been committed to doing this over a number of years and is continuing to improve their process. In the early years, it's probably not that big of a difference, but when we're zooming out to nearly 4 or 5 years out from the onset of such a project, then we're seeing the impact, and we're seeing other cities wanting to take part and do their own version of this. This is the impact of it, because then we can cut ties with some of the privatization that is naturally happening. Not only is there a cost savings with this, but we're prioritizing people over that profit. We're putting people ahead of distant people far away, making decisions that impact you and me here, now, in this place. And that's the beauty of this. There's always kinks to work out, but I'm really proud to be a supporting partner on one of these projects. For a couple of the nonprofits that I'm working with that have been in the food, water, education sectors, especially a lot of my clients tend to be on the front lines doing work that is community focused to feed people, to educate people. And you don't necessarily get to decide who comes through the door. And it can be tenuous of working with so closely with people and not having resources to go around, and also burning out your staff. So a lot of these organizations are working with me to make their services more inclusive, to create a more inclusive workplace culture, moving from a place where it might be toxic or it might be more tenuous and there might be discussions or conflict happening, to a place where people aren't overworked. There is space to bring up grievances, and there are plans to bring community engagement in again to improve the conditions, not just for staff, but working within the organization in concentric circles where we support the staff so they don't need to feel so burnt out. They do feel heard, they do feel supported, and then to move in concentric circles through to their guests or the community at large. And what relationships do they want to build in that community, especially when we're thinking about climate change that is happening in real time? Those kinds of organizations will be bearing the brunt of it. So there are people who are taking the opportunity to dig in and make changes. A couple other examples, these are some of which I have used in the past and some of which I think are great models, is I really love Getting Fresh Flowers. So this isn't a plug for them or anything, but I use Arena Flowers. And I really like that because not only is it ethical, I have a subscription, so they are planting trees somewhere in the world. They are paying an ethical living wage, and they are making it sure their packaging is carbon neutral and so on. So they are doing the work here of making their subscription as ethical as possible. Now, unfortunately, I would love it if the packaging was more reusable rather than you recycle it or compost it. But I can see the thread of their work that they are improving as they go forward, picking ethical suppliers, the way they're growing the flowers and paying living wages to their staff and the people doing the growing and so on. These things are all very important. Another good model is the CSA model, or the food box schemes like Riverford, where farmers grow these vegetables, and sometimes they are community supported agriculture. That's what CSA stands for, that they're paid a fair wage and it's community minded. And then they put the produce in boxes or have farm stalls or so on set up. This is a great model. When farmers sell their produce like dairy or fruits and vegetables to the supermarket, they're getting a fraction of the profit from that, generally 10 to 20%, depending on the locale. When they're selling through these kinds of schemes, the farmer makes a living wage through that. It's more likely that they will be compensated for their work. And it's supporting the local economy. Another organization I think that's doing great is Ecotricity. We've used them for a number of years. And even when I lived in New Mexico, I spent a little bit extra on the tariff to pay for the wind power. And I don't remember the name of the power company, but there are organizations trying to build greener technology and invest in that: solar panels, wind turbines, and so on. Even tidal power from waves in the ocean. There are so many ways that organizations can be doing this. And I think it's great to be supporting organizations who are trying to build infrastructure for sustainability for the future. A couple more examples. There is a charity called Overexposed that works with children. They have taken a stand towards not using children in their imagery going forward. And that kind of stand is so super crucial because they know children and children's images can be exploited or misused. So they've taken a stand for that. So this kind of thing can be really powerful. I bet many of your organizations already have a powerful mission. Why not take a stand for something and set the industry tone going forward? Another great one is grant funders, like the Kindle Project. A lot of times grants are written for certain types of people. They don't cover certain types of costs, like often they don't pay for labor. And then there's a whole reporting system that it comes with the gift of this money. And oftentimes this money that comes from these grants or endowments have come directly through colonialism and capitalism. So they have come from harming people for centuries. And then that wealth is given back as philanthropy to certain groups with a lot of strings attached and is a bandage to the problem that they created themselves through this whole money grab of capitalism. So it doesn't do very well. But organizations like the Kindle Project actually help people by matchmaking. They help people who have wealth that they'd like to give away in some way. And then they have a diverse team of mostly people of color who get to come in and decide what projects they want to donate to. And those are separate than the funders themselves. And they have a very low taxing way of the application process. There's no report writing afterward and so on. So you can use the money as you see fit, which is really good when we're thinking about mutual aid and distribution of finance. These are great tenets. When we put a lot of strings, we make it very difficult for organizations to continue to do their mission. And I'm sure if you run a nonprofit, you're probably aware of these issues. But there are people taking a stand to do it differently. And one other shout out, I just watched their summit earlier, JMB Consulting. It's a UK-based organization. And they have created something several years ago called BAME Online, which is Black, Asian, minority, ethnic. So they created an event, but they've grown from strength to strength. So this year they re-released it as Uncharitable, and they have been creating resources through these talks and summits that are really juicy, diving into nonprofits that are UK based that are actually changing the way they are approaching things that support racial equity and that are trying to redistribute finances and create praxis that creates more liberatory work. So those kinds of organizations, they have done an amazing job. Their previous event, they had BSL and ASL translators. They offered some free seats to make sure that people who are single founders or who are interested in these topics but don't have budget for these kinds of events, that they could still attend. And they looked generously for sponsors and organizations who could attend. And in the 5 years, that project has continued to grow. So there are amazing models out there for what we can be doing. And what I'd suggest to you at this point is look at this and think about, there might be some pings that show up, might have some light bulb moments of, we could do that. Or I think this would work better for our industry or our location. Or we have laws against this, but maybe we have more scope to pivot it towards this, or we need more support for this group, not that group, right? So I want you to toy with it. Think about it like a scratch pad. Think about it like the empty whiteboard or your empty canvas where you can start to play. And it's that creative container where you are just starting to imagine what that could look like. Okay, I'm recording this after episode 5. Most likely, this episode is going to be broken into 2 episodes. So, first of all, thanks for sticking around. But my reflections after this episode are really focused on what does reimagining our workplaces look like? Maybe you've had an excellent experience, and I'd love you to reflect on that. Think about it. Even send me examples. I've shared a couple in this episode of organizations or snapshots of companies doing the right thing. They might not be 100% holistically doing it right across the board, but they are taking a stand for something and they are doing something. How can you start doing that in your organization? What I think is through this work, we often will come up with creativity and boldness. What happens is under capitalism, we tend to come up with the same solutions. Oh, look, they have a yo-yo. I'm going to make my yo-yo this other color, or I'm going to change this one feature. And then that's our product. And so then we have very little product differentiation, and we are then competing against each other. And we call this, oh, what's your unique selling proposition? Oh, well, I coach like this and they do it like this, right? Or my nonprofit does this, but then there's other organizations in the same industry or same locale, and we're not working together. We're competing for the same resources. We're trying to serve the same people, but we're not actually working in harmony together. That's how these things kind of start to look. So there's very little difference. And instead of fighting the system, i.e., punching up to create systemic change, we're fighting with each other. We're fighting, and we're still keeping that same paradigm of alive of we don't have enough resources. We don't have enough time. And instead, if we started to listen to people, we say, oh, we don't want that service, or this service already does that great. We don't need to create another toolkit. We don't need to address that. We can just send them this way, right? We can have their needs met in this way. Or maybe what we think we're doing is not actually what we're doing in the community. And so having that feedback helps us reallocate our resources and make different decisions. It starts with that co-creation and listening process. Before that, we start with reflecting. So I urge you to reflect and do that work of addressing that indoctrination. I hope you're getting some of that through this series, and I'd love to see how you get on. My inbox is open to you. I'll drop a link to my email so you can send me an email and say what's on your mind. We're about halfway through season 1 at this point, and I'd love to hear how this is landing for you. I would love for these first 12 episodes to really set a foundation for a post-capitalist workplace. So that means even if you don't engage further, that you're going to have some excellent resources and ideas right there for you. Some new concepts, some new skills and techniques, looking at some of the mindset and indoctrination that we can start challenging, and most importantly, start to take action. So feel free to send me an email if any of this is resonating and if you have any questions. And the rest of the series, we're really going to dive into now that we've laid this stage and this foundation for you. Now, how can we start to take action in a way that helps us be sustainable in that action, not just starts and stops. We just do a little bit and then don't touch it again. We do it because there's this protest. We do it because there's this movement happening. No, we do it because it's important to do it all the time. And we need to integrate that with what we're already doing. We're doing it in a sustainable way so we can keep doing it. And we are co-creating as we go, meaning we're not making this up. It's not didactic. It is, we want to create change in a meaningful way. And this is what we're going to do to that end. And where we don't get it right, we're going to apologize and we're going to go back to the drawing board and we're going to iterate and continue to improve. All right. So hopefully that inspires you. and I'll see you back here for episode 6. Thank you for joining me on today's episode. Let's connect and continue the discussion on our website.